Welcome everybody. I'm Councillor Lindstad, Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation. Please be assured that we have put appropriate cleansing and social distancing measures in place to ensure that this meeting is undertaken in a COVID-secure manner. This has included requests for all attendees to have taken an LFD test within 48 hours of the meeting, the use of the NHS Track and Trace app or attendee log, 2 metre social distancing, the wearing of masks when not seated, a one-way system in the Guildhall and a temperature check upon arrival. Limited seating space has been made available. However, this meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they so wish. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Can I ask members to remain seated throughout the duration of the meeting and to wear a face covering when seated unless speaking? Please only use seats marked with a green circle. These seats have been allocated to ensure 2 metre social distancing. Some housekeeping information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at the turning circle at the end of King Henry Street, past the University's Park building. To comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Everyone speaking via a microphone be on camera, including those making deputations. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphone and remember to switch them off when they have finished. I am aware that the supplementary agenda and the report on supported bus services was published this morning. There were reasons for this. This is because the figures provided by the bus companies were only made available to officers late last Friday. If members would like an adjournment to read the report, I'd be happy to provide time for this after the first item. So I've spoken to both the opposition spokespeople and we agreed on about 10 minutes. But if you need more time, then please ask for it. Right, some introductions. I'll start there on my right. Councillor Bosher.
Councillor Simon Bosher. I'm Councillor Graham Heaney. I'm the Labour Group Spokesman on Traffic and Transportation.
Wayne.
I'm Wayne Layton. I'm a Finance Manager here at Portsmouth City Council.
Thank you. Simon.
Simon Bell. I'm the Principal Public Transport Officer at the City Council.
Felicity.
Felicity Tibbury, Transport Planning Manager.
Pam.
Pam Turton, I'm the Assistant Director for Transport at PCC, and apologies, I need to leave at about 4:30.
Fine. And Scott?
Councillor Scott Pater-Harris, Vice Chair of Licensing Committee.
And you're here to make a deputation, are you?
I'm here for the deputation on the bus lanes.
Lovely, thank you. And Karen?
Karen Martin, Democratic Services.
Thank you. Have we got any apologies? I don't think so. I think everybody is present and correct. Any declarations of interest from the two opposition spokespeople? No? Councillor Heaney? No? Okay, thank you. Right, we will start with item number, I think it's 3, which is a trial to allow Portsmouth City Council licensed private hire vehicles, PHVs, in bus lanes in Portsmouth. And who's going to present that? Felicity, thank you.
Thank you. So the purpose of this report is to detail the commitment made at full council on the 9th of November 2021 to undertake a minimum 3-month trial to allow Portsmouth City Council licensed private hire vehicles in bus lanes in Portsmouth. It's recognised that taxis and private hire vehicles are an important mode of transport for many, providing 24-hour on-demand travel across the city. This trial would support this mode of transport, potentially enabling improved journey times through the access to bus priority lanes. A closely monitored trial would provide information and data to understand the potential impacts of other users on in bus lanes. For example, any bus delays and cycle safety. This will be reported back in an interim report to Traffic and Transportation. The trial will be undertaken under an experimental traffic regulation order, which will provide the opportunity for residents and stakeholders to be consulted throughout the duration of the trial. This consultation information will be fed into the review and brought back to Traffic and Transportation. Therefore, it's recommended that the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation firstly confirms the commitment made at full council on the 9th of November 2021 to undertake a trial to allow access for Portsmouth City Council licensed private hire vehicles to use bus lanes in Portsmouth. Secondly, notes that a working group will be established which would include transport operators such as local bus companies, private hire vehicle operators and any other interested parties to implement and input into the trial. Thirdly, delegates authority to the Director of Regeneration in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation and the Section 151 officer to release funding to undertake the monitoring and evaluation of this trial as the details are developed, and this will be funded through the parking reserve. And finally, notes that a report will be taken to Licensing Committee for further comments and input into the trial. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicity. Do we have the deputations now? Are you going to read them or shall I? Pardon? Sorry.
Would you like Councillor Peter Harris to go first?
Yes, okay, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's a welcomed report. I think it's a good move forward for the private hire trade, and I think it's something they've been pushing to for a long time. And I actually want to say thank you to the officers for changing their mind, because I know you've been wrestling with it for a while. I'm looking at the Assistant Director behind me, who I've managed to convince in the last 18 months, which is great. What I would say is there's a couple of things from the report that I just want to go over and flesh out. I mean, the length of time for the trial is 3 months. I think for a more complete data set, it would probably be better I know that's the minimum time, but I think realistically we probably need to at least a 6-month period to ensure that we can get a complete data set and the drivers, you can see their patterns and behaviours. And I think especially as we move out of the Christmas period into the early spring period, I think people's behaviours are different as the weather changes. People want to go to the seaside, and I think we have to be cognizant of that fact as well. And that's what else I think the buses will be, with people going into Southsea, will obviously be filling up as well. So to get a complete data set, I think a minimum of 6 months might be a better idea. The working group, I think, is a good idea. Obviously, I think from what I gather, I imagine that the trade reps will be involved in there. I think that's quite important, especially the fact that you've got the Hackney reps and the private hire reps, who obviously represent the same element of the industry, but obviously their roles are slightly different in the role they play. I think it's important. And how it is monitored. I think I was reading the report, and if I'm right, and please steer me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like there's going to be people standing up and actually looking if people are circumventing. Obviously, I know we've got the ANPR system for bus lanes that recognise eligible vehicles on pre-approved data. So obviously they're on the white list, I think it is called. They call it the white list. So could we actually put those vehicles on the white list as well? So if they are going down an incorrect, if they're going down the bus lane incorrectly, that can be flashed up, or it can be flashed up so they can do it properly. I mean, I just think it would make lives easier, and we don't want people standing there with clipboards, literally going over when we've got bus lanes that we can use that in. I know that some of our bus lanes have got the ANPR facility, so I think while we've got it, we should use it, because I know that's what they use for the Hackneys at present. So if we can transfer the private hires onto, I know it's a lengthy thing, I know there's over 900 private hire drivers at the moment, but I just think it's a sensible thing to do, and it's just joins it up with the Hackney and the private hire trade. But fundamentally, the recommendations are quite sound. I mean, there's just a few points that I wanted to add, and obviously on licensing on Thursday, you get to do it all again, Felicity and Pam, so we look forward to seeing you, and I'm sure the drivers and the trade reps will have more robust questions than mine, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peter Harris. I've got 2 written deputations. One is quite long, so I'll go through it fairly quickly. The first one is from the Cycle Forum, and it reads as follows. Portsmouth Cycle Forum strongly objects to Portsmouth City Council's proposal to run a trial allocating private hire vehicles use of the city's bus lanes. In 2015, a similar proposal was considered by TNT. The Council's report at that time set out reasons why this decision should be deferred. 2 of these reasons related to enforcement and identification of vehicles. The third reason for deferral was the atrocious safety record of Hackney and PHV drivers in collisions with cyclists. The report shared that in 70% of cases, the PHV Hackney driver was at fault. Whilst the first 2 reasons seem to have been resolved in the current proposal, the safety of people cycling is completely ignored. And there's some questions. Where is the updated collision data? What measures have the taxi cabinet companies and PHV drivers put in place since 2015 to stop endangering and hitting cyclists? Has there been a dramatic drop in cyclist casualties since 2015? Our own analysis of casualty data sourced from PCC and attached, so this is not the case. In fact, the trend line is increasing. Where is the view of the police who objected on safety grounds in 2015? What is the view of the bus companies who objected in 2015? The report fails to provide decision makers with this information, which is readily available. In 2015, Hampshire Constabulary shared that Portsmouth PHV and taxi drivers had the worst record in the county, significantly higher than Southampton, of hitting cyclists, and objected to the proposal as it did not align with casualty reduction principles. According to the Council's own LC Whip and LTP, over 75% of cycling infrastructure in Portsmouth is substandard, and many key links are missing altogether, such as Fratton Road, Kingston Road, London Road. Bus lanes provide crucial space for people cycling to be distanced from high-flow motor vehicle traffic. In 2015, there were around 240 Hackney cabs and 900 private hire vehicles. Enabling private hire vehicles to access bus lanes will increase the number of motor vehicles in bus lanes threefold if these figures are the same today. But we expect that they have increased as ride services like Uber have been introduced since 2015. On December the 4th, we asked our membership, would you feel as safe as you currently do on the less safe cycling bus lanes if you had to share with PHV drivers? 100% of the respondents said they would feel less safe, and several members shared their own scary experiences of close passes by private hire vehicle drivers. How does this align with Portsmouth's newly adopted Portsmouth Transport Strategy, which commits to prioritise walking and cycling? How can this sit comfortably with a city to share which achieved cross-party support and is an adopted PCC document, which is a target to reduce cycle casualties by half by 2020? The target has already been wildly missed. The trend line continues to increase, with the drop in 2020 highly likely to be a result of fewer cars on the road during national lockdowns. It is very hard to understand why the Council wants to progress this proposal, other than perhaps the suggestion is to placate PHV drivers who are now hit by charges for the clean air zone. If PHV drivers have clean vehicles, surely they will not be charged. So we also question how this proposal seeks to deliver the Portsmouth Transport Strategy goal to deliver cleaner air. Is it not just a subsidy which will enable PHV drivers to drive their polluting vehicles more? In addition, we question how enabling over 900 more vehicles into bus lanes supports the Portsmouth Transport Strategy goal of transforming public transport. The millions of pounds due to be spent on bus infrastructure in Portsmouth from the government's Transforming Cities Fund and forthcoming bus service improvement partnership will at each junction enable a bus driver the advantage of jumping ahead just a few cars. If PHVs are allowed in the bus lanes, this advantage would be completely lost. How do the bus companies who objected to this proposal in 2015 feel about this? We agree that Hackneys and PHVs can provide a service to replace private cars out of hours when bus services stop or are less frequent. But at these times, there is no congestion and therefore no need to use the bus lanes. As a reminder from our 2015 deputation, PHV drivers charged by the mile and are under severe commercial pressure to move quickly. They are unlikely to wait patiently behind a cyclist in the bus lane. Private hire drivers receive their jobs through an electronic device which can distract them from the road. These devices require physical interaction for use and therefore remove attention from the road. It is common for them to use these devices to begin looking for the next job before they have dropped off a fare, i.e. whilst the vehicle is in motion. The Department for Transport advises against allowing PHVs to use bus lanes. Allowing PHVs to use bus lanes will create further barriers for cycling, making the roads appear more hostile, and will therefore inhibit PCC's goals of getting more people cycling. We would also like to point out that any proposal to allow PHVs in bus lanes will be an experiment with live human subjects in the form of cyclists and drivers. It is quite possible that in the context of this experiment, one of those subjects could be seriously injured or killed. Have you fully considered that possibility, and are you content as decision makers that there is sufficient evidence that the proposed experiment is safe and official. I think I've gone past 6 minutes, and there's quite a lot more to be read. Do you want me to continue, or shall I? Are you happy for me to continue? Okay. Right. Other government organisations that conduct trials with human subjects have strict safety and ethical guidelines that must be satisfied before any trial can go ahead. These serve to protect both the experimenter and the subject. The current proposal sets out monitoring measures including casualty data and near-miss data. Casualty data takes at least 3 months to arrive from the police to the council, in which time plenty of cyclists could have been hit. How will a decision be made after 3 months to extend or close the trial without this full data? Near-miss data is intended to improve safety for cyclists. It is not statistically representative or even widely used, as the council has failed to advertise it sufficiently well. Should a trial go ahead, we would expect to see signs up at regular intervals along the bus lanes to advise people cycling that they can share their views with the council. Calls and complaints to the licensing department could also be used to support monitoring. There are cameras available that can track movements of vehicles in proximity to each other too. Why have these not been considered? Perhaps the council can send out its licensing officers to cycle the bus lanes at regular intervals during the trials with close pass detectors on their handlebars to see how many times this occurs, or are they content for the public to be the guinea pigs? The public and regulatory bodies would look for written evidence that PCC had planned trial properly with due diligence to include defined procedures, identifying objective measures of success or failure, and specifically addressing ethical and safety aspects. Not to do so would make the council vulnerable to charges of negligence. Finally, we would suggest that the best way to improve the lot of the taxi PH driver is to reduce congestion on the roads by offering people more viable alternatives to their private cars. As in 2015, we would suggest that the PCC Licensing Committee can also work with the taxi trade to drive up safety standards so that in future some access to protected lanes may be possible. Water work has been done in this regard since 2015. Have drivers had training? Do they know how it feels to be cycling in Portsmouth to work, to school, with your children on the back of your bike? The proposal for a trial allowing PHVs to use bus lanes will inevitably expose vulnerable road users to greater risk. How many additional road casualties are you prepared to accept? We urge you to reject this proposal and retain bus lanes for existing authorised users, buses, hackney carriages and cycles. If you do eventually decide to run a trial, it should not occur until such time that cycle infrastructure fully compliant with government guidance, LTN 120, is available parallel to every single section of bus lane. To close, we should apologise for not attending in person to provide a deputation, nor will we be signing this deputation on behalf of any individual member of our group. This is because back in 2015, when we shared our views, the views of the members, views backed by evidence, the bus companies and the police, the previous chair and their family, were violently threatened in their home by members of the PHV trade. We are open to working with the PHV trade to find a positive solution, but have received no positive approach to them by them to date. And that's the Cycle Forum. I haven't read this other one, but Karen seems to think there's quite a lot of repetition, but it is quite short. This is the Walk Ride Waterlooville. It's a relatively new volunteer-led group campaigning with over 500 supporters within Waterlooville and the surrounding area, calling for better infrastructure to support active and other sustainable travel. Dear councillors, we object to this proposal and do so on 3 grounds. The increase in traffic in bus lanes will result in the perception of increase in actual risk from vulnerable road users currently using them, as recognised in government guidance LTN 120, especially by drivers who are paid by distance travelled, often controlled by mobile phones. Secondly, this proposal will very likely result in the blurring of boundaries between Portsmouth-operated bus lanes and Hampshire-operated bus lanes, and result in increased illegal use of key bus lanes in Hampshire, such as the A3 zip corridor through Purbrook and Widley to Portsmouth, which is key in enabling people to cycle into Portsmouth, as well as in maintaining an opportunity for bus passengers to bypass long queues of private motor traffic. Increased illegal use would be detrimental to these benefits. And thirdly, given the number of PHVs seen in Portsmouth from the surrounding areas from Newborough and Bolt, we believe that only having 5 cameras to monitor the use of 53 bus lanes with no determinative resourcing plan agreed for their use during this proposed trial is insufficient to act a viable deterrent to prevent only Portsmouth registered PHVs, such much in the same way that the low risk of coming upon the sparse police operated mobile speed cameras not a constant and active deterrent to speeding. Therefore, we have the opinion that the number of vehicles expected to use the bus lanes will be significantly beyond that currently predicted. We'd almost like to raise concerns with the impact assessment form. The question, will it improve road safety, doesn't enable the impact assessment to say no, it will negatively impact it. It's only a yes or no question. In this instance, we agree that it won't improve safety. Instead, it will make it worse. Therefore, again, we object to this proposal. That's it. Right. Councillor Heaney, do you have any questions?
Yes.
Carry on.
I have some general questions to start with. How many local authorities currently allow private hire vehicles to use bus lanes? Do we know?
Felicity, I think Felicity probably knows.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
How many local authorities allow private hire vehicles to use bus lanes in the way we're proposing here?
Yeah, so there are quite a few, also our neighbouring authorities as well. So we're working closely looking at Southampton City Council. So they currently allow private hires within their bus lanes. So we're working with them to understand how they currently enforce. There are also some other trials and examples looking at Reading in particular, and also learning from how they've operated. So there are quite a few that allow private hires in their bus lanes currently.
Okay. How many private hire vehicles do we know currently exist? Figures for 2015 were quoted, but I'm not sure whether they're accurate. Do we know how many vehicles might... And I know they tend to fluctuate a bit, obviously, because people come in and out of the trade, but do we know what those figures are accurate or not?
I probably do. I probably do know. It does fluctuate. You're right, Graham. And the fleet at one point was, I think it was 1,100, and then it went down post-COVID to about 920. I think it's about to 958 at the moment. But as we're seeing more drivers come back into the fleet now, so I think post-COVID we're starting to see an increase. But there has been some significant decrease in the last few months.
Right. Okay. I have some more detailed questions about the proposed trial. It says that there are going to be 10 locations that are going to be monitored for a 4-week period. Have these 10 locations yet been decided upon? And can we as opposition spokesmen get some information about where they might be? And the 4-week period, is this going to be sort of midway through the trial? Or are we going to start monitoring from the beginning? And I suppose the other question I have about the trial is, it says it's for 3 months. Is it definitive for 3 months, or are you anticipating that it might be extended for a further period, and if so?
Right, can you go through those one by one, Felicity?
Will do, of course. So the monitoring that we're looking to do, the locations haven't been chosen yet. That's something that we'd really like to work through with the working group, and obviously make recommendations to the Cabinet member for a decision on those locations. But we'd be looking to do a before, during, and at the end of the trial to ensure that we have a baseline that we're monitoring against. And in terms of reporting back, we've obviously suggested a minimum of a 3-month trial, and a decision paper will be brought back as an interim report as to whether that trial is extended at that point, and we'll also feedback on the data at that time as well.
Okay. Right, I had one more question.
And what was it? There were 3 questions you asked, weren't there? Have those all been
Yes,
answered?
about the trial, about whether the trial was being extended,
Yeah,
when it was happening, when the
yeah.
monitoring was happening, when the trial was going to be extended or not. And my final question, I've lost my final question. What have I done with it? Yes, I know. Yeah. I think some came out of the deputation. Can I come back on that?
I was going to suggest you can
because I
come back
scribbled
to it.
something down on the deputation, so I think
Yeah.
I'll come back on that
Right.
if I may.
Councillor Bersham.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I have a couple of questions which might well be better answered by Councillor Peter Harris as a sort of more licensing-y type questions. But in the first instance, can I ask, a reference has been made in the Cycle Forum to a 2015 report. Now, I've had a quick Google of that report while you were going through the Cycle Forum's deputation. But essentially, if I can ask, what has actually changed other than the fact that the recommendation for 2015 was to reject the application to do this, and this one, it would appear to be an experimental traffic regulation order to see how it pans out. Is that essentially what the difference is between the two?
Yeah, so the 2015 report, obviously things have evolved since 2015, and we recognise that we need to undertake a trial to understand the impact on buses, and with the intention of bringing that data back and the evidence so we can really understand the impact.
Yeah, because certainly in the 2015 report, there seemed to be, I will call them deputations, if you like, from the bus operators and from the police who were against it. So I'm assuming then that the 2015 one was essentially a traffic regulation order to make it a permanency, to which they objected to. And the difference between that and this is that it doesn't look like from this report that we've actually had any significant consultation with the bus companies or the police on this. So what we're essentially doing, if I'm right, is going with an experimental traffic regulation order so that we can do an ongoing consultation with those authorities during the process.
Yeah, absolutely. As part of this trial, it's going to be really important that we have that ongoing consultation and dialogue as part of the experimental traffic regulation order. And as outlined in the recommendations as well, we're really keen to work with stakeholders and interested parties to really shape the trial as well. So that's going to be really integral.
Okay. Next one, assuming you make a decision to go with the recommendations today, and that is your decision, Lynn, when would we look to start this trial period?
So we're looking sort of March next year. Obviously, we need to update all of the signs, undertake the experimental traffic regulation order, meet with the interested working group, and shape the trial and get all of the monitoring and evaluation sort of set up. And as I say, set out that baseline for what data we need ahead of the trial as well. So there are a number of steps that we'll need to undertake. We'd also need to undertake a full road safety audit as well, picking up on some of the points that the Cycle Forum have made. So I think there's a series of things that we need to do ahead of the trial starting, so we anticipate the trial starting in March.
Okay. On that basis, that's helpful in that respect. I'm looking at the Director of Finance's comments, and he reckons this is going to, they reckon it's going to cost about £110,000 to do this, with 38 grand to install signage, 35 grand to collect data, and a rather eye-watering figure of 37 grand to produce and submit the experimental traffic regulation order and to cover legal and project management fees. I'm curious around how the fact that 37 grand is spent on legal and project management fees. Perhaps that's just me being a cynic. So I'd be interested to know a bit more about that. The other bit I'm looking at is that we're talking about minimum of 3 months. I would suggest spending £100,000 on a 3-month trial will probably be better looking at something in the region of a 6-month trial if you're going to do it that way, certainly at that sort of cost, notwithstanding the fact that if you're starting it in March and you're going through all the way through to September, you're starting when the weather is reasonable through the summer months and then into the autumn, so you've got a spread of weather there that may well have an impact on the on the trial as we actually go forward. But my suggestion would be 6 months, but I'd be interested to know a bit more about the 37,000 as much as anything else.
Wayne, have you got any comments on that?
Yeah, these, yeah, so the 110,000 is an estimate of how much I think is in total. What the team have done is they've tried to break down the costs as much as possible. There'll be a further deep breakdown of that 37,000 because, yeah, you're right. Looking at that, that doesn't look quite right. So I'll send you a more detailed breakdown of what that 37,000 is, but it shouldn't cost that much just for what was being described in here. So apologies, that's I've missed that when we've gone through.
That's fine, we're all happy for that, because my follow-up question to that was going to be, how does that £37,000 relate to, let's say, the experimental traffic regulation order for like the Elm Grove cycle lane? So it'd be nice if you could give me an idea of how it relates to Crosswain, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. Sorry, Lynn, you've gone all nervous now.
Helen?
I have a couple of questions I'd like, can I ask Councillor Peter Harris?
Right, yes.
You mentioned, if it's appropriate to do so, that we had about 950 private hire vehicles registered in Portsmouth. I am assuming that not all 950 are on the roads in Portsmouth at exactly the same time.
That would be, I'd probably say that's absolutely correct, Councillor Bosher. There's a couple of operators that I think Councillor Stagg knows about who has some cars parked up at the moment. So we've probably got about 200 vehicles that are off the road in terms of the fact that we haven't got enough drivers for them. So no, they wouldn't be all on the road at the same time.
Right, that's fair enough. And the other question I had was around one of the paragraphs in the Cycle Forum, which was on their penultimate sheet, and it reads, finally, we would suggest that the best way to improve the lot of the taxi private hire driver is to reduce congestion on the roads by offering people more viable alternatives and whatever. It goes on to say, as in 2015, we would suggest that PCC Licensing Committee can work with the taxi trade to drive up safety standards so that in future some access to protected lanes may be possible. What work has been done in this regard since 2015? Have drivers had training? Now, as I understand it to be a private hire taxi driver, essentially your basic requirement is to have a full clean driving licence, but I'd just be interested to know what extra training do they have, and if they don't, what could be imposed through the licensing committee onto them to ensure that they go through that sort of training.
I think it's a good point. Scott?
Thank you. I'm going to give you a bit of a long-winded answer, Councillor Bosher, because actually on Thursday we are reviewing our licensing policy, and the last time we did this was in 2016. So basically, licensing authorities have a duty to ensure that any person to whom they grant a taxi or a private hire vehicles licence is a fit and proper person to be a licensee. So obviously when we're considering that application or licensee, we pose the question on the balance of probability, would you be happy for that person to be taking you home? You know, and if the answer to the question is no, the individual probably shouldn't hold a licence. So if I go through what the current policy is for the fit and proper person test and how it incorporates into our policy, the statement and guidelines we have on the relevance of conviction. So obviously if someone has a conviction, we probably take it to subcommittee and say on the balance of probability, should they hold a licence? The requirement for applicants for both hackney carriage and private hire drivers' vehicles, they have to be held a full driver's licence for 2 years. On regards to penalty points, for example, so say if someone has penalty points, when they reach the 9-point threshold, they automatically go to a subcommittee, to which when the committee will decide what sanction to take. Generally, we would ask for drivers to have a clean licence when they apply. There are mandatory drug testing requirements, so all drivers are drug tested. And the requirement to adopt a minimum entry age limit to the age of 21, so you can have to be 21 to apply. You can't be younger than that age. And there's also mandatory new driver trainings, and that's for both hackney and private hire vehicles, followed by an English language competency and proficiency testing and driving assessment training. So it's quite a considerable lot really to be a private hire or a hackney driver, because we look at these in the licensing trade as professional drivers. That's what they are. They have to work within quite a stringent policy that we have. And for example, I can give you a good example where we have CCTV in the vehicle. So let's say there is some poor driving. Generally, we have evidence of it, and they'll go to the licensing committee and be sanctioned accordingly. To answer Councillor Boshel's question, it's quite long, but yes, they do have considerable training for driving, not only for driving assessment, but for actually their behaviours as well. So I read that from the Cycle Forum, and I actually thought it was a bit disingenuous to label the whole trade to be in that manner, because we do have some bad behaviour, but I have to be honest, it's quite minimal, and they are dealt with accordingly by the licensing committee when they are brought before us.
Thanks, Councillor Peter Harris. Just a quick follow-up on that. I understand they've been going through a process of fitting CCTV cameras for the protection of the drivers and the passengers. Is that's also road-focused as well for the benefit of driving, or is it just about the occupants of the cab?
It's about the occupants of the cab. Be mindful as well that due to the ICO ruling that there are no audio being played on that, so it's just visual. But we've had instances, for example, where a driver has pulled out in a bus, they had an accident behind them, they've been hit side on, so the camera is quite, it's there for the safety of the travelling public and the driver. So if there's any allegations of any, let's say, misconduct, or if there's allegations of bad behaviour and driving, poor driving, you can see it via the camera, whether a car is swerving around the road or not. And we have had instances where that has been brought to book, or we've had allegations that have been disproved. So the use of CCTV, it must be worth noting as well that currently they are looking at rolling this out in other areas. So, for example, Gosport are actually looking at the introduction of CCTV, and since the policy has been adopted, we've actually seen a lot more engagement with the drivers as well. So I think it's a good policy.
Thank you. I've got one last comment, if I may, Lynn, and then Graham, by all means. You talked in terms in recommendation 2.2 of a working group. I would be interested to know who you would envisage beyond what it is, local bus companies, private hire vehicle operators, and you said and other interested parties. Perhaps you could let me know who you have in mind with other interested parties.
Yeah, of course. So I think, as today we've highlighted, the Cycle Forum would also, if they're interested to be part of that working group, we would welcome them. And if there is anyone else, so for example, we talked to the Transport Liaison Group last week about this paper coming forward. So if there was anyone on any of our other stakeholder groups that would like to be part of the trial working group, they would be more than welcome. And it may be that we need to set up a series of work, sort of subgroups, when we talk about specific things such as monitoring and evaluation, and how we take that forward. So if the recommendations are taken forward following today's meeting, that's something that our project manager will set out to take forward.
Is that something where you envisage a cabinet member being part of that working group? Could I suggest, and I don't know how Graham feels, that maybe you include the opposition spokesman in that working group, so we have a very rounded view, and it might be worth seeing whether the chair and vice chair of licensing would like to be involved in that working group as well, or at least somebody from licensing, so that we have a licensing view represented in that working group as well, which would be useful.
I was going to suggest that as well, Simon. I think it's very sensible, have as wide a view. And I'd also like, not just the Cycle Forum, but somebody from Joe Public, you know, that not the experienced cyclist, but somebody who maybe has some difficulty.
Pompey pensioners might be worthwhile.
Pardon?
Pompey pensioners might be a worthwhile one.
Good thinking, yes, yeah, good. Can I just ask, clarify something? Is it only PCC registered vehicles are going to be allowed in? And if the trial goes ahead and if it then gets confirmed, that's when we get the ANPR cameras in? So
as I understand it, Lynn, it's only going to be PCC registered taxis because licensing have the registration plates and details of PCC registered taxis, and therefore we can filter them out on ANPR. in that respect.
I just wanted to clarify publicly. Councillor Heaney, have you found your question?
Yes, I slightly got caught out because I didn't know there'd been a proposal in 2015, because it was right at the beginning of the application. I had no idea there was anything coming forward until then. I think it would have been quite useful to have had at least maybe a short paragraph in the report saying that this had been considered before and maybe why it had been rejected, given a bit of context, because obviously Councillor Bosch has been around a bit longer and more consistently than I have on the council, probably would have been aware of it. I certainly wasn't. I think I got from, I almost thought you were reading my mind actually at one point. The issue was, it was just a proposal, was it just a proposal to have private hire vehicles in the bus lanes, or to have an experiment with it? I'm not quite clear what that 215...
Was this the 2015 paper?
Yeah, what was that about? Because it was actually doing it. It was a decision to go ahead without a trial.
I'm just trying to refer, but just bear with me a minute.
Sorry about that. I just thought that would have been useful.
2015 was, I think there was another report, goes back to 2011 from what I could, so this is about the third time this has come forward.
Oh, right.
But this is the first time we're looking to do it as a trial under an experimental traffic regulation order, and do the consultation and get the feedback in a live trial. Beforehand, as I understand it, there was a move to do it, and the recommendation was not to proceed.
Oh, I see, yeah. So it's just a straightforward yes, no decision. Yeah, okay, that's
yes, I didn't remember it being a trial before proposed.
Yeah.
No.
Being a historian, I quite like context and history, so that's quite useful. I did have one more question as well. Currently, if private hire vehicles pick up or set down passengers, say somebody's called them to go somewhere, they can't use the bus lane to pick up and set down people. Is that correct or not?
That's my understanding.
So
yes.
if we allow the trial to go ahead, will they be allowed to pick up and set down passengers in the bus lane, or must they just use it for continuous driving?
Yes, I mean, the whole point is not to sort of slow down buses. So if you have anything parked in them, we're having this problem with taxi ranks in North End, aren't we? Because, they want to be on the main drag, and that, especially there, because it's a very busy road, they will just block the road. So
I was only asking because obviously bus lanes do pass residential property, and people might want to nip out and get in, but they're not allowed to stop in front of the bus lane. They've got to go somewhere else and park in them, and that's good. That's good. Yeah.
That would be the theory, but the practice is
well, that is I think because
this is where I think ANPR cameras are needed eventually. I mean, it would be lovely, but it was just too expensive for a trial to actually have them. Any more comments or?
Comments. I'll just make a comment if I may. I mean, I do understand the concerns of the Cycle Forum. I mean, clearly the bus lanes do provide a relatively safe place for cycles to go without other vehicles intruding, although of course it is buses and I recognise that they are worried about the potential numbers of vehicles that are going to now use the bus lanes and make it more difficult. And yes, if you've got a car, up behind you is a cyclist, it can be quite intimidating. And I hope that the usage of that will be recognised by the private hire vehicle drivers, that they do what they are sharing it with cyclists, and cyclists have as much right to be there as they do. So I think that's really important. I suppose the only way we are going to find out whether this is viable is to have a trial and to monitor it properly. So this is probably the best way forward. I mean, I'll obviously reserve judgment. I mean, as I have with other things like the Void trial. I thought it was very sceptical, but the trial is now going ahead, and we'll see what the results are. And I think I take the same view with this. Let's see what the trial brings out, and also make sure that we consider all the available evidence that the impact of this. And I think cyclists particularly will want to be sure that they can provide evidence about their experiences of it, which I think is important for them, because that is one of the few areas where they have some protection at the moment, because we don't have a lot of dedicated cycleways and no dedicated cycleways in the city. So.
Thank you. Simon, you got any other comments to make? I think it very much depends on the evidence that comes out of that 3-month trial, because one thing that occurs to me, how is COVID going to affect the trial? We don't know how long restrictions are going to be in place, and we don't know how many vehicles are going to be on the roads. If it's during lockdown, as it was during the first lockdown, it's very few cars, so you wouldn't get a real evidence base, not a genuine one. But Well, what I'm saying is it depends how long the COVID restrictions are in place. That is another factor which would affect, yes, perhaps the 3 months or the 6 months. But as it's said, it's a minimum of 3 months. It's not saying it's just for 3 months, and we'll play it by ear. We have to be reactive to the evidence that's coming through. And the point that strikes me, I have concerns, I am the first to admit, about, well, for a start, that bus lane's meant to be for buses. That's the whole point, that's why they called that. And we want to encourage more people to use buses. So as long as it doesn't slow down the services we've got already, then that's reasonably okay. But the onus is on the PHV drivers. And if they, if safety is compromised, if casualties increase, if there are more complaints, then that's it. The trial fails and it doesn't go ahead. So it's entirely up to the PHV drivers. And I think that's something. I think the workshops, etc., beforehand and having a working group working on it is important. That message has got to come across. It is entirely up to them whether it goes ahead, continues. And if their behaviour is too poor, then it will fail. And that'll be a long time before it'll be thought about again. So, yes, it is just a trial, and we'll see how it goes. I'm happy to okay a trial. We do have to have cover all the bases. I think all the points that the cycle forum have brought up, I mean, they're just common sense, aren't they? So we've got Scott here as from the licensing people, so you can hopefully get that message across, Scott.
Yeah, no, I think it's some good points, Councillor Stagg. Obviously, we've got our meeting on Thursday, where obviously the licensing committee will make a judgment and make a view and send it back to yourselves. I don't envision there'll be too much heartache or pain on that one. I think they're quite welcoming of the fact that they're actually going to get a trial. So hopefully, I can only imagine they'll be on best behaviour. What I will add is I do think Councillor Bosham makes a point of a minimum of 6 months. I just think for the data set, and I only say that because I think you made note of the restrictions and how things are with COVID, and I think it just gives you more time as the cabinet member, if I'm honest, and I think that's would be the best thing to do, and that's probably something that I will bring up on Thursday, and it wouldn't shock me for the licensing committee to go with that point. With regard to the working group you mentioned earlier, I'm happy to volunteer Councillor Udy as well. I'm sure she won't mind. Well, absolutely, yeah. But as we are co-chairs, according to herself last week, I'm quite happy to volunteer. But I think 6 months would be a better.
But as I said, it's a minimum of 3 months.
I think if you said a minimum of 6 months, I think you give yourself more time. That's all.
Well, I think it's open-ended, so I don't have a problem with that. So yes, I'm happy to go along with all the recommendations, but as long as we get all those points in place, which I'm sure you will make sure you do. Thank you. Now we're going to go on to item number 4, which I appreciate you've only got this morning. So you would like a 10-minute break to go through. So is that all right with you? Can you can stay that time. And what about you, Simon? You okay? Good, thank you. So we'll reconvene at 5 o'clock by the clock. Thank you. We're on to item number 4 now, and are you going to present that,
Yeah,
Felicity?
of course.
Thank you.
So the purpose of this paper is to outline Portsmouth City Council's current position on supported bus services and to seek agreement to extend the services until the 31st of December 2022. So currently Portsmouth City Council subsidises 3 complete bus routes, 3 at the week, and that's the 12, the 22 and the 25, plus Sunday and bank holidays on services 13 and 14. The coronavirus pandemic has had a major impact on public transport ridership and the number of passengers travelling by bus, but these services are still essential to allow key workers to access employment and residents to access health and make essential journeys. As outlined in section 3.8 of the report, Portsmouth City Council have recently submitted the Portsmouth Bus Service Improvement Plan to Central Government, and we anticipate a response in spring 2022. At this time, it's quite difficult to re-tender the bus services without knowing what the government announcement would be in terms of funding for Portsmouth. And further to this, we've also discussed with Portsmouth City Council procurement team, and they would support an extension in the current climate of the 5 contracts. So therefore, it's recommended today that the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation approves the extension of all 5 existing supported bus service contracts from the 1st of January 2022 up to the 31st of December 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicity. I don't think we've got any deputations, have we? Right. Councillor Bosher, would you like to ask questions or?
Thank you very much, Lynn. I mean, in essence, I'm not overly opposed to this because this has been a victim of coronavirus like so many other aspects have been in that respect. Am I right, Felicity, that the table in 3.6, those figures are have essentially been previously reported to us as being the projected cost to extend?
So those are the costs that we've been given to extend the contracts from First Bus.
And they're based on what we've done in previous years with them. So they're based on a non-pandemic scenario, are they?
No, so First have recently quoted, these are the revised prices for the coming 12 months, which we received last week. So that's the new costs for the future 12 months up until December 2022.
Is that an increase then on what we would currently be paying then?
Yeah, there's a slight increase previous years, and that takes into account, I think there's fuel increase and a number of other factors in terms of ridership as well. So there is a slight increase from previous years.
You say slight increase, that's 216 grand. So they revised the costs on us based on a drop in figures of passenger usage through the pandemic, and they've also factored in a fuel increase at the same time as a result of the panic buying bit we had 2 or 3 months ago. Is that what we're saying?
There has been an increase in operating costs. I mean, it would have been, I think, about 208,000 before. So the increase is about 7,000 on this. And that does reflect the fact that the fuel is more expensive now. I mean, I know there was a panic buying, but the price hasn't fallen back now. It's still, you're still looking at £1.50 a litre for you and me to buy fuel, and obviously the bus companies buy in bulk, so they get it at a lower price. But still, the trade price is higher than that, and service like Service 22 hasn't been increased since it started operating in 2017. We've had no increases any years. So
Slightly changed the complexion a little bit. Again, fundamentally, I think we are where we are. But so what we're doing is we're going outside of our procurement process to extend something to existing operators because of COVID, but they factored in the increase in fuel to charge us more, as well as less passenger numbers. And the other thing I noticed that's come in right at the end of the report, under 8.3, additionally, the operator is seeking to charge an additional £50 per day on top of the costs for the 25 service, quoted, because of the introduction of the clean air zone. This amounts to an additional cost of £18,250. So that's another. Is that 18,000 included within this 215,880, or is it on top of?
It's in addition to. So that £50 charge they are really incurring. Once they upgrade their fleet, which should be in the spring of this year, so 18,250 is what it would be if it was an entire year. If they upgrade their fleet so they're not caught by the clean air zone, then we won't get charged it, and neither will they.
Right, so that is a separate entity. Because the cynic might say, we're paying their clean air zone charge for them, thank you very much, ka-ching. That's what 8.3 says to me, and that's not quite what you've just said, Wayne, is it really? If that's per year, and if they stick to their schedule to improve their fleet quickly, then they won't incur it and they won't charge it. How are we going to monitor that to make sure that we aren't being charged for something that they wouldn't necessarily incur in the first place? Because perhaps I'm just looking at this and being a bit cynical, but I'm just looking at it and thinking, oh, that's the City Council paying our clean air zone charge for us. There's no incentive on our part to improve our fleet. That's what the cynic might say, and I'd like to hear somebody tell me differently.
Well, I'm not allowed to be political, but what you just relayed to me is exactly what I just told you, that we are paying their clean air zone. They're planning on passing that cost on to us. It'll be quite easy for us to know when their fleet is updated and they're not incurring that clean air charge. We're working quite closely with First anyway. I mean, I don't know if I can say too much more about it at this point, no.
Just following up on that thread, if I can, Lynn, we're only talking about a subsidised bus route here, so therefore we're only talking about the cost of that subsidised bus route. Is the same principle being applied to all of the other bus services that come into the city centre? Because the predominant ones for Drayton and Farlington will be the 23 and the 21, which are stagecoach. There aren't any first buses that would come down on there. Are we reimbursing their £50 clean air zone charges as well, or not?
No, because they're commercially run services. So this only applies to where we've got to provide a subsidy.
Right. So
they've also been retrofitted using a grant from JACU.
Yeah, no, that's why I sort of get that. That's probably why I'm just asking an open-ended question. So in theory, then, where those buses that aren't compliant on commercially run services would either be swallowing that £50 a day or they'd be passing it on to their customer base. Probably the latter rather than the former, I would have thought. But yeah, very much so. Which is the thing that brings voice scooters back into the equation if you speak to Councillor Cole and how much it's saving him per month to go from Fratton to QA Hospital. I think the figure he quoted me was it saving him £50 a month to hire a scooter as opposed to going on a bus. That's a big chunk of money, Mr. Bus Companies, if you're listening. I think that was probably it, other than one of the things I wrote down here, and it's sort of been addressed in 6.6, was we've extended some of these once already to fall compliant with the 25, and we're now extending them again for another year. How does that place us with regards to competition law? Because we're not tendering these services out essentially, and in some of them for best part of 2 years. And I am assuming that this will be flagged to governance and audit and standards as part of one of their red letter outside of natural procurement procedures. Am I right in that?
Felicity.
Yeah, so we've been working closely with our procurement team and the procurement manager, and we've completed the necessary waivers as part of that process. And I think what this extension will allow us to do is undertake a full procurement process throughout the coming year. So that will be on the agenda to do for early next year.
sorry, so we're going to do a full-on go out to procurement, see whether there's anybody else out there that wants to run bus services in Portsmouth, which would become effective from the beginning of 2023.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Graham?
Yes, thank you. Simon's picked up on the 8.3, which I thought, when I read it, that was fairly sort of bland, but I then realised when I read it at the same time what they were asking us to do, which I thought was outrageous, actually. They should not be charging the City Council for it. They should pick up the cost. And I think we should tell them, no, we're not going to give you £18,000 for the charge. If they wanted to avoid it, they should have upgraded their buses earlier. I mean, this is not an issue that's suddenly come across us. It's been, something that's been running for a long time, and they shouldn't expect council taxpayers to pay for the fact that they haven't got compliant buses. Just a little bit of a question about the Director of Finance's comments, because it says at the first sentence, the current supported bus services are funded entirely from external government grants, but we only have surety of this funding until 31st of December. And then it says later on, the funding arrangements for the next financial year are unknown, but an announcement is expected from the government in the spring of 2022. When we say surety of funding until 31st of December, what exactly do we mean? Do they mean they do not pay us after the 31st, or we don't know what we're doing in the spring? Because it's a little unclear. The sentence implies we don't get any money after 31st, but it says they're going to do it in spring 22. So presumably it runs on the financial year, not the calendar year. So have I missed something here?
Wayne, are you answering that one?
Yeah, so in this year, we've received a additional grant, the Coronavirus Bus Service Support Grant, which has contributed towards supporting our tendered bus routes. We won't get that next year, because the scheme has been stopped unless we go into some other form of restrictions. And then the BSOG grant, which we receive each year, which is around about 90,000, we don't get notified of that until sort of February, March time. And that's why the report's saying we can't say for certain that we'll get BSOG. We suspect we will. Otherwise, we're going to cover it with a parking reserve.
Anything else, Graham?
Nothing else on this, but there is something I'd like to say before we finish.
Fine, go ahead.
Probably Felicity, I think.
Right, yes, go on, yes.
Just following up, if I can, on 8.3 without pressing it too much. Am I correct then that if you take the 25 service, which incurs the clean air zone, we're paying a subsidy for the route, we're also paying a subsidy for their clean air zone, and we're also paying a subsidy for anybody that uses a bus pass. So essentially, we're paying 3 times for somebody to use that bus. Am I right in that respect?
You are, but the third bit in terms of travel, you're thinking of concessionary fare holders.
Yep.
And that's where we are subsidising the cost of their travel, not subsidising. There is a difference that a fare payer would normally pay, but if you've got a concessionary fare holder, we pay the fare instead. So although it comes out of our budget, you could argue it's not a subsidy, it's a cost to the council, but not necessarily a subsidy to the service particularly. It meets that. But the other 2 elements are, we're paying for but when they would have quoted for this contract, there wasn't the clean air zone wasn't in place, and the price was quoted based on the principle there wasn't a.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. You can call it concession, you can call it subsidy. All I'm saying is that somebody that gets on a number 25 bus with a bus pass, the council taxpayer is paying for that pass in the first instance, or subsidising it, concessionary fare, whatever you want to call it. So I'm paying for that, and then I'm paying for the bus itself because it's a subsidised bus route, and now we're going to be paying for them to use the clean air zone as well. So the average taxpayer is paying for that service 3 times in that respect, in some shape or form.
But concessionary pass holders, doesn't matter what buses they travel on, we're subsidising those because we're paying for all of them.
I fully appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm just narrowing it down to one bus service, if you like, and the fact that on that bus service, it doesn't matter which of those subsidised bus services you look at, in the case of every single one of them, the City Council is paying for the service in the first place because it is a service we want to put in place, and I understand that. We are also paying for a concessionary fare, and I understand that as well. So in essence, we're paying for it twice, but it comes back to that £18,000 again, and essentially the taxpayer is paying for that service 3 times. That's the point that I'm making.
But only until they get their buses upgraded, and hopefully we can put pressure on them to get that done ASAP, because we don't want to be spending unnecessary money. I know, I appreciate that. That's why I do the job. Graham.
I do want to raise a matter about process and procedure. We had a bit of a discussion about this at the beginning of the meeting, but I'm not going to discuss that. I probably should have raised this at the last TNT Cabinet meeting, but again, I arrived late because of a work matter, which meant I got held up. But I wanted to refer to the fact that we had at the Cabinet meeting on the 30th of November a report that went on the Safe Routes to Schools, and it covered 3 schemes in 3 wards. I was a bit puzzled when I saw that going to the Cabinet, because I couldn't understand why the Cabinet was dealing with it, since we had a TNT meeting a couple of days later. As I understand it, it was a proposal to spend within the existing budget, so it wasn't outside of the budget and policy framework. It was something that covered more than 1 ward, but a lot of the things we discussed, like the bus lanes, covers more than 1 ward, so I don't see why that was a necessity to bring it to the Cabinet. There seemed to be no clear logic as to why it went. Because the procedure rules say that if an individual portfolio holder can, having considered the matter, decide that he, she, would prefer not to exercise delegated powers, and for the issue to be considered by the executive as a whole, in such case the portfolio holder will prepare a short covering report to the executive with a recommendation to accompany the chief officer's report. There wasn't any such report on this, so I was really curious as to why this item went to the Cabinet instead of to the portfolio holder meeting, your meeting.
I honestly can't remember.
Well, you were there.
I know, but I don't know. I don't know. I can't remember why it went. I can't.
Well, this is what slightly worries me, is because there seems to be no logic to where reports go, and it appears to reflect. I haven't obviously investigated other portfolios, but it does appear to reflect TNT. If I had wanted to make representations on this, I would have had to have gone to the Cabinet meeting, which was at a different time, a different day, and then I've had to go to a second meeting and another week to do it. It doesn't make any sense. There are clear reasons why things should go to the Cabinet, and the procedure rules make it quite clear that they should be things that are matters which raise a matter of the policy which is within the budget policy framework. Well, it's not a policy issue. An urgent proposal which raises a matter of policy which is outside the budget and policy framework. Well, it's not that. Any proposal to transfer budgetary provision from an item to a budget head which is responsive of one portfolio to another portfolio. Well, it's not that. And consideration of reports by the monitoring officer. So none of the criteria that appear to be things that require the executive to make the decision are met. And I don't want to say exactly what reply I was given when I asked the question on the telephone, but there is no logic to this, and I think we need a proper clarity about why and when things go to the executive. And if the portfolio holder isn't going to do it, it needs to be. We need to follow procedure rules. Now, if we don't think those procedure rules are any good, i.e., we don't want the portfolio holder to write a report as to why it's gone to the executive and not to the portfolio, then we need to change the procedure rules. We don't need to not just ignore them and seemingly on the whim of individual members decide what goes to Cabinet or not.
That's fair enough. Let me go back and find out, because I honestly can't remember whether it was something it came in a Cabinet briefing or whether it came in a group meeting or what. I can't remember, but I will check. I'll send some emails out this evening to find out exactly where, because I honestly can't remember where or when that was decided. So are we finished with the the supported bus services? Yes, I'm I accept all the recommendations. I would like to put a lot of pressure on first, though, to get that retrofitting done as soon as possible, because I don't see why we should be paying that extra money for something when they can get a grant and could have got a grant earlier to get them. Because there's 105 buses altogether have been retrofitted and been paid for by from JACU money, so I don't see why these couldn't have been. So I'm happy to accept all those recommendations. Thank you very much, everybody.